Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another card video at my YouTube channel and blog. Today I'm going to be continuing my mini series on color mixing, and I'm going to be using two stamp sets from Avery Elle. One has a really pretty floral image on it, and the other has some nice greetings. So I'm going to be using some 5x7 Strathmore cold press watercolor paper today. And my plan is to stamp this floral piece from the Avery Elle stamp set repeatedly all over this watercolor paper, and then I'll be painting that in. So in order to do that, I need to make sure that I clean off the stamp in between moving it to a new location while I repeat all these stamps. If you are not using a MISTI tool, you just have the stamp on a block, you don't need to clean it in between since you're just going to be adding more ink. But since I am using my MISTI tool and I'm going to be placing that stamp down onto the white watercolor paper, I wanted to make sure that that stamp was clean just in case I needed to move it around a little bit. So I'll go ahead and stamp that again just above the previous stamping. And now I'm going to kind of rotate the paper around and excuse me, and move those flowers all around to kind of fill in all of the gaps. This is going to create a really pretty pattern over this entire watercolor paper. And I'm doing it very carefully like this because it's going to be really the main focus of the card. A lot of this pattern is going to show on the finished card, and so I wanted to make sure that this pattern was stamped well. I'm now using a Pilot envelope addressing pen to fill in some of the gaps in between the stamped images, and I'm using this pen in particular because it's waterproof. I am going to be watercoloring over the top, so I wanted to make sure that my pen wasn't going to bleed. And I'm just filling it in with some leaves and some circles, kind of like little bubbles or droplets or whatever you want to call it. Just something little to fill in those gaps. And if you wanted to use a small stamp from a different stamp set, you definitely could. For me, I just thought it was really fast just to use that same kind of just draw them on there with a marker. So now I'm using a flat paintbrush to add a ton of water over the entire surface of my piece here. And I'm going to be adding some color on top of this. So I'm going to be showing you the mixing on the palette that I'm using. I'm using that same Prang palette that I used in my previous video. And I'm going to have this kind of split screen so you can see the color mixing on the right hand side of the screen and then the painting on the other side. So right now I'm just mixing a nice blue-green color, a little bit more toward blue than green, and I'm dropping it in as an underpainting. I used this underpainting technique in a video last week on an envelope with that coloring book page, and I'll link up to that in the top corner if you want to check that out. But I really love adding like an underpainting in between all the flowers. I think it looks really, really pretty. So, and I'm mixing up another color, and this time I'm just adding a little bit more blue to the mix. I want it to be slightly more blue than green. It's really not going to show too much, you know, once I have my painting all over the top, but I just thought it'd be a nice touch. And because the blues were a little too close, I decided to make this one more green. So now I'm bringing in some more green. Let's just filling in some gaps, and because my watercolor paper was wet when I applied this, all of those edges of the color are going to kind of wick away and soften. It's going to be really, really pretty. So after I had all of those areas kind of filled in, I used my heat tool to speed up the drying process. You could definitely use a hair dryer or anything like that if you wanted to. Okay, so now I'm going to be mixing some colors for the flowers. So I'm taking some red, and I want to have kind of like a dark purple red shade for the darkest color on the red flower. So I'm going to take a little bit of purple and I'll be adding that into the red, and it's just going to deepen that color and give it more of like a raspberry shade, like a dark raspberry. And then I'm going to mix another version of the red, and I'm not going to add any other colors into it. I'm just going to have it be just a really watered down red, so it reads a little bit more pink. And as I start to paint this, I'm going to speed up the painting process, but I will keep all of the footage of me mixing colors. I'll keep that at real-time speed because I want you to be able to see the mixing of the colors, since that's what we're focusing on. So I just put down just a plain wash of color over the medium-sized flowers. And then I mixed up another color for the larger flowers. And I want these to sort of be almost like a coral, like a warm coral shade. So I'm starting out with some orange. And I want to have a nice big puddle of that in my well here on the palette because I don't want to run out of any of the colors. So I'm adding lots and lots of orange to that area. If you think of it as kind of like a thick, it's almost like the consistency of a thick milk. That's kind of like what you want. So I added some red to that, and that's going to warm it up even more. And then I'm going to add the tiniest bit of green. And green is the complementary to red. And since that was kind of a reddish orange, it's going to dull this out just a tiny bit. And that's going to make a really great kind of dark coral shade. So I'm also going to mix a really yellow orange, and that's going to be more of like how it's going to read more of a little more coral. Between those two colors, I'm going to have a nice variation of color. Add a little more red to that. And then I'm going to go ahead and start painting. So I'm putting down that lighter orange coral shade. And I'm going to do the same thing I did with the red flowers. I'm just going to put that over the entire flower, and then I'll let that dry. So now I'm going to mix up a yellow shade, and I don't want it to be this really bright yellow. I want it to be toned back just a little bit so it's a little bit more of a golden color. So I'm going to add the tiniest bit of purple, just a little tiny dab of purple. I don't want too much. In fact, I'm going to wipe some of it off over here, and then I'll bring it over to my yellow. And I'll mix that in, and that's going to give it a little bit more of a golden shade and just tone back the really, really bright yellow. I'll put that over the yellow flowers. I want these areas to be completely dry before I move on. So I hit that with my heat tool, and then now I'm coming in with the darker shades of each of these. And I'm keeping the shading really simple. I'm not trying to blend in the shading. I mostly just want there to be a darker shade on the flowers, kind of like their two-tone, so that they don't read so flat. They don't look as flat as they did before. I'm going to move on to the darker orange coral shade. And I'll put those over the top. I really love how in some of these areas where that underpainting was a little stronger, that the flowers look like a slightly different shade of orange or a golden color. I think that's a really interesting look to it, and it's a fun way to get variation in your painting. Like try doing an underpainting, and it'll really, I think it gives a little bit more of a sophisticated look. So I'm cleaning up my palette just with a baby wipe because I'm going to be mixing some additional colors for the leaves, and I want to make sure I have a nice clean palette to do that. So I've already painted half of the leaves on this background, and I'm going to show you mixing colors for the rest. Basically, I took a large paintbrush because I needed a large amount of this green and blue-green paint. I ran out, and that's why I'm mixing more. So I moved to a larger brush. I think this is a size 10 brush, and I'm using a larger brush because I'm going to get larger puddles of ink or of paint. So I'm adding a bunch of green into both of my sections, and then I'm going to be adding some additional colors to just tone these back a little bit. So on the color on the bottom, I'm going to be adding a little bit of yellow to make it more of a yellow-green, really brighten that up. You can see in the finished painting that on the leaves there's kind of like a brighter yellow-green shade. That's what this color is on the bottom. And then for the color that's kind of like in the middle of the palette, I'm going to be adding quite a bit of blue because I want it to be a little bit more of a blue shade. And I'm also going to tone it back by adding a little bit of orange. So you'll see that process here. I forgot I did add some purple to that yellow-green, and it kind of graded out too much. So then I added lots more yellow, and that kind of solved that issue. And then it was, it became more of that yellow-green, but toned back just a little bit. So I'm going to add that blue to that middle shade. Get it to a nice blue-green. And I do want it to be a little more on the blue side than green, because it is going to be paired with that yellow-green, and so the two of those together are really going to look nice. I add a little bit of that orange, like I mentioned, that just tones it back a little bit. And now I've got my two shades that I'll be using as I do the painting on all of the leaves. So basically I'm just going in really randomly and very loosely, just dropping in some different bits of color I'm not being too precise, like I'm not trying to stay within the lines. I just want to get this color on here, and there's quite a bit of space, quite a bit of spaces to color in. So I added, I kind of alternated between the two colors. I would add a little bit of the brighter yellow-green, and then I'd go back and add some of that kind of toned back blue-green, just trying to get a variation in color. So if you wanted to be more precise while you were painting this, you definitely could spend a little more time on it. But I decided that since this background was so large and covering such a large amount of space, that I would keep this very simple and not complicate it too much. I liked the little bit of shading that I had on the flowers, and I didn't think I needed to add it a whole bunch more. Didn't need to add a bunch more. So I'm going to add a darker red shade on all of these buds on each of the flower clusters. And then I'm going to go ahead and let this dry completely so that I can move on with my card. So once it was dry, I cut it down so it can be a background on my card. And I actually made a little bit of a mistake. I cut it a little bit too narrow. I should have cut it at 3 3/4 wide, but I cut it at 3 1/2. But that's okay. I have some really fun strips left over that I can use on another card. And when I go to assemble this card, I'll just have to trim off a little bit off the side because my card will be a little too wide. So I just trimmed off, a 1/4 inch off that one side, and then it was completely centered. As far as the greeting goes, I stamped a happy birthday from that greeting stamp set in Versamark ink onto some licorice twist cardstock from Basil. And then I applied some white heat embossing powder and melted that with the heat tool, and then trimmed out the piece and adhered it down onto the card. And I just used a little bit of foam adhesive behind the flower background and also behind the happy birthday strip. So while I was painting the flowers, I didn't worry about these center areas because I knew that I wanted to use a white gel pen and just add a little bit of white to the centers of the flowers. I thought that'd be really fun. And then I took a clear Wink of Stella glitter brush pen and added a bunch of shimmer on top of the flowers and the buds. And because I'd recently squeezed my Wink of Stella, a lot of shimmer came out, which I don't mind. I like lots of sparkle. So that's my card for today. Hope that gave you an example of how I might use a little bit of color mixing with my regular card making. I'll be back on Friday with another example and show you all that color mixing. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.